Are you a business owner stuck in fear, doubt, and worry about what the marketplace will look like in the future? Then this show is for you. Strap on your seatbelt and get ready to disrupt and innovate. Here's your host, Lisa Levy.
Today's guest is Larry Mandelberg, a seasoned consultant, speaker, and author who specializes in solving complex business problems. As the fifth generation of his family's business legacy, representing over 170 years of organizational success, yes, you heard me, 170 years of success, Larry brings a wealth of experience and perspective to every challenge. Over the course of his career, he's launched 4 startups, led a merger, and executed a successful turnaround, proving that he doesn't just talk strategy, but he delivers results. In his latest book, Businesses Don't Fail, They Commit Suicide, it's the culmination of 23 years of research into why businesses collapse, not from external forces, but from within. It's insightful, entertaining, and challenges leaders to take a hard look at the self-inflicted wounds holding them back. Larry, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you, Lisa. It is a joy to be here.
I am so excited to talk with you today. Family businesses are something that I am so enthralled with, and to hear the success that your family business has had is something we're going to dive into. But first, I really want you to share with us what it is you're doing today and why it's important.
Wow. What I'm doing today is fulfilling my life's purpose as I see it. I believe that everyone that wants to work should have a job that they love and be treated well. And I believe that everybody that has employees should treat them like the gold that they are and enjoy them and embrace them. And when you have that kind of an environment, what you have is this productive synergy that's just magic. And it's hard to create, particularly in today's world where we have 4 generations working in the workplace. And we've got COVID, and we've got remote work, and we've got virtual this and Zoom that. It's hard. And if you do it right, it just becomes joyful and it just becomes so much better. And that's why it's important. I teach companies how to get there.
And that's a big destination to achieve.
Thank you. I call it the no help wanted vision, because what that means is you never have to put a help wanted ad out. Everybody that works for you loves you and doesn't want to leave, and the people that are where they don't belong know it and go and find you, and when they find home, they know they're there.
And that is a vision to swing for. That is, it's big, it's bold, it's audacious. And those are things that leaders, business owners, founders should be aspiring towards. Because I think we have a tremendous number of examples. I'm going to pontificate for half a second here from our Fortune 500 leaders that are touting all the wrong things. And we've created a workforce with 4 generations that have very unique and different needs. And I don't think any of them are really effectively being met holistically. And we're hearing this old stuff from pre-pandemic mindsets that flat out doesn't work. So how is your approach and what you do with your clients and what you've done with your own business? How is it so different, and what's the difference? Because it's obviously impactful, I guess.
Yeah, well, that's actually a really important question, and I'm really glad you asked. It starts with the research. When I realized that I wanted to know why organizations failed, and this was in my teens, this is part of the long story of my family and the background and the multi-generational, etc. But my dad made a comment to me about how organizations grew and failed. And I realized that there was this perception, this was in the late 60s, early 70s. Yeah, I've been around for a while. That if you started a new company, we call them startups now, and you made it a couple of years, you're going to be fine. And then that shifted into the late 70s. It was if you make it 3 years or 3 to 5 years, you'll be fine. And the problem with that is that businesses fail all the time, right? So how do you ever know that you're okay? But more businesses fail in their youth than in any other stage. And part of that is because every business starts young. So there's more opportunity to fail, right? The longer you're in business, the fewer the opportunities to fail there are. So I said to myself, if it's just time, that's stupid, because too many people are losing too much money investing in these companies. There's got to be a reason. Why doesn't somebody figure it out and say, stop doing this? So I started researching. Now I'm getting to the answer to your question. What makes me different? I couldn't research every business, and I wanted it to be statistically valid and academically rigorous. So I had to identify a way to segment the market I was going to research. It's not based on market. It's not based on industry. It's not based on legal structure. It's not based on size. It's based on 4 criteria. Right there, it makes me very, very different. The first is a desire to be sustainable. If the organization, if it's a family-owned shoe shop and the kids don't want it, what do you care? Shut it down when you're done. You got to want to be sustainable. Number 2, there has to be multiple layers of management. If you're an organization where everybody reports to one person, you're too small, you're not going to be in my group. That got rid of hundreds of thousands of potential people. Third, no primary revenue from retail sales. That's a big one. Part of that is because I don't understand retail. Part of that is because retail is highly emotional and it's not as logical, predictable, or controllable. So I wanted something where I could have a theory, prove it, and go to market and have people say, this is fact. And then the fourth one is kind of interesting. You have to be autonomous. And what that means is that you have to be able to make decisions based on the well-being of the organization and its customers, which means no publicly traded companies, no external investors. So right off the bat, you can see that what I was looking at was a particular type of business, not an industry or a segment. So that's the first thing that makes it different. The second thing that makes it different was this is data. This is not opinion. This is not assumption. This is not what I want to believe is true. This book is 70% data, 20% firsthand experience, 10% opinion. And what it talks about is it talks about how organizations evolve over time. The underlying foundation is something called corporate lifecycle theory, which is a study of how organizations age. And it's fascinating because it's just as predictable as humans aging. And guess what? Organizations are humans. So just as humans age, so do organizations, and it's totally predictable. So I start, and now here's the chewy nugget. I've identified 3 stages of maturity. And the first one is youth. And organizations that fail in the youth stage always fail for the same reason: lack of clarity of purpose. So I talk to people all the time who think they're in adolescence, the second stage, and they're struggling and they can't figure out why. And I say, because you haven't figured out your purpose. You don't have clarity of purpose. And they say, of course we do. We're an ad company. Of course we do. We're a bank. Of course we do. We're a law firm. Of course we do. We're a marketing firm. And I say, fine, you take 5 or 6 of your people from across your organization, and I want you to ask them to write down what your value is and what you do. And I guarantee you, if you ask 6 people, you'll get 6 different answers. They'll be close, but they won't be the same. And what that tells me is that you have a bunch of people pulling in multiple directions towards different goals. Until you get everybody on the same page, pushing towards the same purpose and doing it as a unit, as a team, you're wasting time, you're wasting money, and you're wasting human capital resource. That's what makes me different. That's one of the things.
That I want to play with that a little bit because I love what you've just described. And working with a client recently, we were doing succession planning and looking at. We interviewed 100 people across the organization. They'd all been there for 20 or more years, geographically distributed across a state. So there were some, they were not all co-located, and talking about their values. And one thing that came up from 65% of the people we talked to is it's about safety. I was like, okay, I get it. There's a reason, and it made good sense. I was like, what does that mean to you?
Right.
And when I started to, we did, right, again, this is all data driven, right? But we pulled that back, and there were about 10 different definitions of safety, which is fabulous because it was there, it was important to the organization, but who said it, where they were located, and what their job function was, what it actually meant was so radically different. And the leadership team looked at me and they said, why are you sharing this information with us? And I took the long pause and I said, because there isn't one answer. And they thought about that for a while, and it took a minute, and you can just, around the room, you can see the light bulbs click on, and they go, whoa. And yeah, and so it's fabulous that, I love hearing that it is that honest, right? If we don't know what the purpose is, if everybody isn't aligned towards that, how can we even pretend to think that this is going to survive?
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about the experience with your own family business, because again, right, 5 generations is statistically fantastic and mind blowing. So describe the business. What is it? And give us a little bit about that.
Well, it began in the 1850s in hides and furs, and it began in Canada. It was too cold, so they migrated, and as is often the case, and you got to remember, this was a different time, they went a little too far and they ended up in Texas. And the hides and furs were no longer part of clothing, it was part of fashion. And that didn't work as well. So they moved out of that into scrap. And the scrap evolved into what I call agricultural, but it really has a lot to do with livestock, right?
Mm-hmm.
So ranching and farming and dealing with living things, you've got tractors and you've got fields and you've got fences. And this is long before the industrial age.
Yeah.
So they got into that and then they expanded into food. So it was the whole breadth of ag. And then in the late 1800s, you started to get some automation and you started to get some hydraulics and you started to get some motors and you started to get things like wheel bearings. So you were able to do things with minor automation.
Mm-hmm.
And that evolved into the automotive aftermarket, the car market, stationary pumps, stationary engines. So then they evolved into the automotive aftermarket and agricultural implement dealerships. So we had 2 different ag dealers, we had 2 different auto dealers, and we had an auto parts store and a machine shop. And as we went through the early 1900s and the car boom died down at the end of the 40s into the 50s, they started getting rid of some of those businesses. And what it ultimately boiled down to was this auto parts store and machine shop. And we served 5 states surrounding the state we lived in. And that business has existed. It existed until I sold it. I am the 5th. I did not want to continue in that business, but it was going long and strong until I finished my work there, moved on, and then when my father passed away, I took over the business and ended up selling it. So.
And just for the curiosity factor, there wasn't a 6th generation that wanted it.
Yeah, that's correct. I did not have any children. I've been married for 45 years and no children by choice. I have three sisters, and none of them have want anything to do with the business. So there was no place for it to go.
And that's a natural exit and a positive one, right?
Absolutely.
It had supported the family for generations, and it's a five,
Yeah.
right? And I'll say that over and over again because I had a family business. My family business was trucking in the Midwest, and it failed at the sale happened between generation 3 and 4 because nobody was interested in carrying it forward. It was, it's hard work. So I totally get that.
Exactly.
And it's a happy, good exit.
Of course.
Absolutely fabulous. Um, but from that, obviously, the opportunity to have seen and done things inside of the dynamics of a family run business. Are there any lessons learned or a story that you can share about the dynamics of a family business?
Oh boy. I don't think if we had 5 hours, we could get it all in 5 hours. Come on, you know this as well as I do. Um, the thing that I would say to you that's the most important thing for long-term success, both as a family and as a business,
Mhm.
and the absolute most difficult thing to do is to separate the business and the family. When you are in the business, you are working for a company and you have a fiduciary responsibility to serve those employees and those customers, not your family. When you're not in your business, you have a filial responsibility, a human responsibility to take care of your family in a whole different way. And if those things ever cross over, it's trouble. And I've seen a handful of companies that have done it brilliantly, and I've seen a boatload of companies that have done it poorly. And it is so hard to do because you have to leave your emotion and your history and your personal feelings. You know, you got a sibling and you don't like the way they talk. You think they're disrespectful, and all they are is blunt, but they don't seem to know how to put their mouth shut, when to not say something, when they're being rude without meaning to. And they get in a business environment and you just get mad, and you can't let that happen, right? You have to treat them like an employee. You can't operate this way. You're going to have to get some training. You're going to have to develop some skills. You can be this way at home, but you can't be around customers and talk that way, right? And if that's a problem, you're going to have to give you another job. You're not entitled to a job here. You're paid because you're generating value. If you can't do that, you'll find a job someplace else will replace you. It's just cold hearted. It's brutal. But if you care about your family, you know, I'm a big believer of if you can take a family business and keep all of the family out of it, other than in a leadership role, and do it in a succession, formalized succession manner that understands how to approach the differences in personality and philosophy and the behavioral characteristics of each of the siblings, each of the next generation has. You need to pursue that aggressively. Don't bring family members into the business if you don't have to. It can be done very well, but it's hard.
It is probably the hardest thing to sustain because being able to actually make the separation between your family and your business, right? The personas, how we show up as individuals, it's really hard because the family dynamics, right? They're 24/7, they're years, 20, 30, 40 years of experience with that relationship. And it's not always, a sibling relationship is certainly not a professional relationship.
Absolutely.
Thank you for making that distinction and sharing that with us. I would love to hear about the work that you're doing with your clients today. What is one of the things that what is one of your great success stories?
One of my favorite success stories is, uh, and I have to be kind of opaque about this because
Mhm.
for obvious reasons, for professional reasons.
Sure.
An organization that was founded and had been in business for 20 years. The founder, this was in the healthcare industry, the founder had been ridiculously successful. They'd grown from 20 employees to 50 employees. They'd never lost a dime. And 1 year, shortly after the Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act was passed, and it changed healthcare in some very positive ways, but this had a very negative impact on their business. Purely by accident, they ended up losing about $200,000. The following year, they lost about $500,000. This is the first two losses they'd ever had. In that third year, they started out in January and they could see they were on a pace to lose $800,000. So they could see the trend, and they called me in and they said, "We need help. We don't know what the problem is." I went in, I brought my program to them, and it's called critical scaling. It's about scaling in a very specific, controlled, methodical manner. And when I was interviewed by the CEO, I said, one of the things that we have to talk about is I have to be able to have honest conversations with you. I have to be able to tell you when you're wrong and to tell you why you're wrong and how you're wrong. And they stopped me and they said, "Larry, I'm a lousy CEO. I know that. That's why you're here." I said, "Okay, we're good." So 4 months, this was an 8-month contract. It extended out into 10 months. 4 months in, there were 7 people on the leadership team. 2 of them left. One was replaced. We realigned all the responsibilities. We fired a bunch of clients. We shifted the marketing. We did all the stuff that needed to be done. And then just as I ended the project with them and they were ready to go without me, the CEO resigned, and one of those remaining members of that leadership team became the CEO and took over the company. And by the end of that year, they were basically at break even, and they haven't lost any money since.
That is a fabulous story and a really important aha that sometimes the founder really should not be the CEO. That as a business matures, that is not necessarily a role that a good founder can mature into. They're two different skill sets.
Right. Well, and people want to say, I want to share this because I think it's important. The question has to be asked, well, so what was the problem? Right? Just the fact that we fixed it doesn't tell you anything. The problem was they were trying to sell anything to everybody.
Yeah.
And what I said to them was, you're at a point where you have to transition from more is better to better is more. You have to stop doing anything for anybody and start doing these specific things that you're really good for, just for the people that really can benefit from them. And that eliminated like 60% of their customer base. And it eliminated people that weren't paying and weren't making them any money. So their profitability went sky high, which is how they recovered. And the staff was no longer overloaded. But what also happened was they lost a bunch of people because there were so many people that said, these other people need us. And I said, yes, but you're not a charity. You're a for-profit organization, and you have to generate a profit. If you're giving your services away and not getting paid, you're going to die, and then you don't get to serve anybody. So you got to decide, are you going to serve the people that you are here to serve or not? So we get back to this concept of purpose.
Yep. And in your first recollection of the story, you answered the question without it being asked when you said that they fired clients, right? That is the number one symptom that they were shotgunning or fishing with a net and not strategically fly fishing. So I thank you for sharing that story, because it is one that as businesses grow and mature, there's a time in the maturity cycle where a lot is good, more is better. But when you really hone in on a specific purpose and you understand the value you provide to your customer, better is always more.
Let me add to that, if I may. So there's only 3 reasons an organization fails. There's youth, adolescence, and adulthood. In youth, it's lack of clarity of purpose. What happens in adolescence, once you get that clarity about who you serve and the value you deliver, they fail because of an inability to provide consistent performance. They make commitments that they can't live up to, right? And McDonald's is the classic example. You go to I went into a McDonald's once, 40 years ago, and I ordered a Big Mac, and they gave it to me in a quarter-pound box, and I didn't even need to read it. I knew it was the wrong box because they're so consistent. And I said, that's not the right. And they said, no, it's a Big Mac. We just ran out of the boxes. It's okay. I'm like, oh, okay. That's what you call consistency of performance.
Yeah.
So what happens is, when you want to get to the next level, you have to be able to deliver all your promises. You have to be able to make promises you can deliver on that are important to people. And if you're trying to serve everybody all the time with everything they need, you can't do that. You have to be able to say, this is what we do, and we do this really, really, really well. And that's what undermines those adolescent businesses, is that inability to provide consistent performance. So that's just the next flow. It's exactly what you're talking about.
Absolutely. Larry, we've talked about some wonderful things today. If you've piqued the interest or curiosity from the audience, how do they find you and learn more?
Businesses don't fail. Just remember that. www.businessesdon'tfail.com. If you go to Amazon, you can put, suicide in, you'll find me. If you remember my last name, I'm all over the web. I'm not hard to find, but if you can just remember businessesdon'tfail.com, you'll get me.
Fantastic. The link will be in the show notes, and we'll put a link in for the book so it's easy for people to find that. Larry, thank you so much for your time and sharing with us how important it is to do it right and build a business that is joyful for the owners, for the employees, for the customers. The grand vision is that we get to a no help wanted state, that people are happy in their jobs. And as attrition happens, because it will for all sorts of reasons, there's always an influx of qualified people who want to be a part of what you're building because they know that what you're doing has purpose. And you shared with us the 4 aspects of what you went through to understand and learn about successful businesses, and making sure that there is a desire to be sustainable, that the businesses that you work with have the multiple layers of management, and that no retail, because that's an ugly business and one you didn't understand, but that there's also the capability that these businesses were autonomous. They were not publicly traded. They had no investors. So, privately held businesses are always more adaptable than the others and are able to hear the real feedback, because sometimes the feedback is you're doing something wrong or the baby's ugly. And it's important that you can have those honest conversations. And when you hear that information, founders and leaders, it's time to take action. And that action is sometimes a little bit uncomfortable, but it's short term. So, Larry, thank you for joining us today. And audience members, you know my rules. Don't get left behind. Join me next time.
That's it for today's episode of Disrupt and Innovate. Head over to iTunes and subscribe to the show.